not only are we not here to jam you up today, we're also not here to judge you. And if there is anything like that, you can imagine we've heard way worse, way different, So if it's true, I hope that you can just casually say, yeah, I mean, this happened. It wasn't as bad as he said, but maybe this happened. So his story was met online, met you, and it was a time when you were experimenting with maybe men. And so he said he met a couple times, met his friends, went to an apartment, had a couple of meetings in a parking lot, and that was basically it. Any of that sound familiar? Okay.
No, I never.
Okay.
I've never even been to Wyoming, let alone driven up there to see somebody.
Yeah. And so this is maybe a weird question for you. Do you have any gay experience?
No.
Okay. Any interest?
No.
Okay. Never had a time experimented, wondered?
No.
Okay. Is it possible that he found you instead of you finding him?
From what John told me, he found me on like a WhatsApp.
Yeah.
I don't even have that app.
Okay.
Never got me. He had my phone, so
Okay.
you could probably saw what app I had, but I'd never even heard of the app. But
Okay.
apparently, like he told me, like I met him through like a rehab center or something.
Is that what it said?
No, that was another guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was totally.
If you met him or talked to him or got to know him, you might remember. He was kind of meek,
Yeah.
but also a little bit flamboyant.
Mm-hmm.
He did fake lip, or not fake lips, but injections.
Uh-huh.
He was very into skincare, makeup, and he mentioned that one of the times, just as a gift, you got him some skincare products.
Mm-hmm.
Does any of that sound familiar?
No.
Okay. You can imagine all the stuff we're dealing with.
Said he didn't know if he was bisexual or gay. He paid for Botox in my forehead and around my eyebrows. He was very attentive, very loving. He said that Shannon was verbally and emotionally abusive. I said, why don't you just file for divorce? He said, I'm just worried that she won't let me see the girls. Chris told me it would be ideal if me and him could move to Oregon and take the girls. Chris said there's got to be some way to get this effing bee out of my life. I just started seeing through Chris's lies. Their relationship was only for 2 months. So at times up, it seems like he got with her right after I ended things in May. Chris said that he was in love with me. He said that he'd never been so comfortable with someone. I wish I'd never met him.
So Trent, can we have kind of a tough conversation?
Sure.
Some of the stuff you're talking about is pretty hard to believe. And we're getting to the point where we're wondering if you're wasting our time.
I mean, is there a question, or, I mean, I don't know how you want me to respond to that. I don't know what else you want me to...
These are the challenges that we have, right? You told us that you watched the video over and over, okay? So we know that you're aware of everything that's out there, and all you've talked about are things that anyone else knows. You haven't brought forth any information. You're having sex with a guy in his car, and you don't know anything about him other than what the public knows about him, okay? You took $60 from him. You were self-admitted booty call. And so now we're wondering if you're a hooker who maybe blew a guy who was a murderer and maybe feels guilty about it, or maybe feels like you're going to get in trouble about it. I don't know what's going on with you, but I don't know why you're here tonight.
No, I'm not a hooker.
Why are you here tonight?
I've had it because she asked me to be here.
No. Back up. The calls between you and Damien and your friends who are blackmailing you, what's that about?
I don't know that it was Damien.
You told us it was maybe some friends who told Damien, and Damien knows about this. How does Damien connecting the dots between you and Chris?
Because I opened up to Damien back then about it when I thought that...
And now you can't find his phone number.
Well, I had cut every...
Stop, just stop.
You see how that kind of doesn't make sense, Trent?
Yeah, I mean, I see how it doesn't make sense, but I didn't ever think in this situation that I would have to recall every little detail. I'm not a hooker.
You're not recalling any details, Trent.
I'm not.
So then that first time he meets you, what was the time frame again?
Right before July 4th.
Okay. And 2017. Okay. He finds you, you guys meet, money and sex. Is that right? Okay. How much money?
That was the time, it was $250.
Oh, okay. First time, 250. Sex was oral sex? Okay. You perform on him? Does he perform on you?
Yes, but not the climax.
Okay. And then tell me about the negotiation. How does that work?
He tried giving me $30 and
Jeez, trying to go cheap on you.
yeah, and I said no. I said no. It's not how this was gonna work. And then the next thing he handed me was $250.
Oh, wow. Okay.
All 20s and a 10.
Okay. You're pretty sure it was 250 and it was cash? Okay. Was there anything about the pre-meeting where he knew he needed to bring money?
Yeah, it was insinuated.
Okay. And how was that?
I put out there half-jokingly that I don't do anything for free with someone that I don't know from a hole in the ground.
Okay. Then it sounds like he really did. He really is at least bi or maybe even gay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Was there talks about him struggling with being in a heterosexual marriage? What did he say?
After I found out, he told me that he was the victim of emotional and verbal abuse, and she treated him like he was stupid. And
Oh. Did you believe him?
at the time, yeah, I did.
What about now?
No. He told me that he couldn't have sex with his wife. Told me that at that time, I was the only one he was attracted. I, as a male, was the only one he was attracted to. And I asked him, well, what about people that come, later in your life? And he said, I don't know about that. I just know what I currently know. And that's that I don't have a sex life with my wife that I've been married to for 2-3 years. And I have to seek it out elsewhere.
Chris Watts will forever be remembered as the man who slaughtered his entire family in the quiet suburbs of Colorado. That story is familiar. We've seen the headlines, the courtroom footage, the tearful interviews. We know the outcome. But what if I told you that behind those headlines, there's another version, one that never made it into the courtroom? It's a story whispered by a man who claims he was Chris's secret lover. A man who says Watts wept in his arms about living a double life and hiding a truth darker than murder. A story the FBI quietly investigated, a story that left the public divided, and a story Watts himself has denied until his dying breath. Tonight, we are not asking why Chris killed his family. That's the question every documentary has already asked. Tonight, we ask something else. Something that cuts to the core of who Chris Watts really was. Who was lying about the secret affair? The convicted killer or the man who says he loved him? For years, this question has haunted investigators, the media, and even prison walls. Because in a case already built on deception, the truth about Chris Watts' hidden life may be the darkest secret of all. The story begins not in a courtroom, but in a small Colorado town where whispers traveled faster than truth. Within days of Chris Watts' arrest, a young man came forward. His name was Trent Bolt. He wasn't a family friend. He wasn't a coworker. He was something far more explosive. He said he had been Chris Watts' secret lover. According to Trent, their paths crossed on a dating app. It was quick, discreet, and dangerous. He described Chris as soft-spoken, cautious, but desperate for connection. He claimed Chris didn't talk about Shannon at first, or the children. Instead, Chris spoke about himself, his body, his insecurities, his loneliness. In Trent's version, The relationship started like many others. Late-night messages, secret meetups, hotel rooms where Watts allegedly let his guard down. But what made his story shocking were not the physical details, but the emotional ones. He claimed Chris confided in him about living a double life, about feeling trapped in a marriage that looked perfect from the outside but felt suffocating on the inside. Trent said Chris would cry after sex, breaking down over the identity he was forced to hide. He told me he couldn't be himself, Trent later told investigators. He told me he felt like his life was a lie. The two allegedly spent nearly a year together in stolen moments, road trips, dinners, weekends where Watts vanished without explanation to his wife. Trent painted a portrait of a man carrying secrets heavier than anyone knew. According to him, Chris talked about the pressure of maintaining an image, of being the provider, the husband, the father. But in the shadows, he dreamed of escape. Escape into another life. Escape into another truth. What gave Trent's claims weight was not only the intimacy of his details, but also the timing. He said Watts had grown increasingly conflicted in the weeks leading up to the murders. He described late-night phone calls where Chris allegedly confessed he was done pretending, that he wanted freedom, that he was tired of being two different people. Trent believed Chris was building toward a breaking point. He just didn't know how far that breaking point would go. So why did Trent speak out? For some, it looked like a grab for attention. But in his words, he came forward because the story being told about Watts wasn't complete. He said the world needed to know the truth about who Chris really was. Not just a murderer, but a man consumed by secrets. Secrets that may have pushed him closer to the edge. As Trent told his story, the media devoured it. His interviews sparked outrage, sympathy, and disbelief. Some saw him as brave, risking ridicule to reveal a hidden chapter of Watts' life. Others saw him as an opportunist, attaching himself to a high-profile case for fame. But the question lingered, unshakable and uncomfortable. Was Chris Watts really living a double life with another man? Or was this an elaborate lie crafted by someone who wanted his 15 minutes in the spotlight? When Trent Bolt stepped forward with his shocking claims, Chris Watts was already behind bars. For the first time, the quiet man from Colorado was forced to confront more than just murder charges. Now, he had to answer the question of who he really was. His response was swift, sharp, and absolute. He denied everything. "I'm not gay," he told investigators. "Nickel was the only affair I ever had." It was a clear rejection, but for many, it rang hollow. Because Chris Watts was no stranger to lies. From the very first day his family was reported missing, his life had been a performance, a calculated act of deception designed to hide the truth. He looked into news cameras and pleaded for his family's safe return, even as he knew they were already gone. He hugged Shanann's friends and told them he had no idea where she was. He sat across from detectives and spun one story after another, changing his version of events until the evidence cornered him into confession. So the question loomed large. Why would this be the one time Chris Watts was telling the truth? Why would a man who lied to protect himself from a death sentence suddenly be honest about his sexuality? It didn't add up. If anything, it fit the pattern of a man who compartmentalized every part of his life, who kept one story for his family, another for his mistress, another for the public, and perhaps another still that he intended to take to his grave. In prison interviews, Watts brushed off the rumors. He insisted that Nicole Kessinger, the woman he was seeing at the time of the murders, was the only affair he ever had. He presented himself as a man who had fallen for another woman, not a man hiding a secret identity. He downplayed the allegations, treating them as distractions from the real story. But the more he denied, the more people questioned his credibility. Because every word that came out of Chris Watts' mouth carried the weight of his history. a history of lies stacked on lies, collapsing in on themselves. Consider this. He lied to Shannon about money, about late nights at work, about disappearing for hours. He lied to co-workers about his marriage. He lied to his own father, breaking down in an interrogation room with yet another version of the truth. Lying was second nature to him. Deception was survival. And now, faced with an allegation that cut at the core of his identity, Watts responded with the same tool he always used: denial. For the public, the contradiction was impossible to ignore. Trent Bolt's story painted a picture of a man torn apart by secrets, struggling with an identity he couldn't share. Watts' story painted him as a man with one mistress, a woman who represented a fantasy life outside his marriage. But both stories couldn't be true. And in the middle of it all stood the most important question. If Chris Watts had lied about everything else, why should anyone believe him now? In a way, this was the cruel genius of Chris Watts' character. His lies were so layered, so convincing, that it became impossible to separate fact from fiction. Every denial sounded like another performance. Every truth sounded rehearsed. And every secret, proven or unproven, left behind the stench of deception. So when Chris Watts looked into the eyes of investigators and said, "I'm not gay," the world was left to decide for itself. Was this the one time he spoke the truth, or was it another lie in a life already defined by them? When Trent Bolt's story exploded across headlines, investigators had no choice but to take it seriously. A convicted killer's secret lover? If true, it could reshape the psychological portrait of Chris Watts, and possibly even his motive. So the FBI opened a file. Behind closed doors, they began digging into the claims that Watts had been living a double life, one that stretched far beyond his mistress Nicole Kessinger. Agents sat Trent down for questioning. They wanted details, not gossip. How did he meet Chris? Where did they go? What did Chris tell him? Trent answered with precision. He described their first connection on a dating app. He gave dates, locations, the kind of specifics investigators know liars often stumble over. He recounted emotional moments, where Watts allegedly broke down in tears, confessing that his marriage felt like a cage. He even described physical details of their encounters, things the average person wouldn't know, but that made his story harder to dismiss. But Trent wasn't the only one. Around the same time, another man stepped forward. This one claimed that Chris had contacted him through an escort website, arranging meetups for cash. The story was less about romance and more about transactions, but the implication was the same. Chris Watts, the family man on the outside, may have been searching for men in secret. Two voices, separate from one another, both claiming the same thing. If it was coincidence, it was a disturbing one. The FBI followed the evidence. They combed through phone records, searching for calls and texts that might connect Watts to the men who came forward. They looked at his digital footprint, dating apps, escort websites, any sign that he had been living the kind of hidden life Trent described. They even searched for payment trails, cash withdrawals, hotel receipts. Anything that could transform allegations into hard fact. But what they found was murky. The digital evidence was thin, scattered, and inconclusive. Phone records didn't produce a smoking gun. No bank payments clearly linked Chris to escort services. No undeniable digital trail tied him to Trent Bolt. In the language of investigators, they could not confirm or disprove the claims. In other words, the truth lived in the shadows, impossible to prove, impossible to erase. For the agents working the case, the reality was simple. Chris Watts had already confessed to murdering his wife and children. He was already sentenced to life without parole. Pursuing allegations of a secret relationship wouldn't change his punishment. It wouldn't reopen the case. And so, the investigation into his alleged affairs with men never went further than a side note in the discovery files, a detail preserved in documents, but never tested in court. Still, those files told their own story. They revealed that Watts wasn't just a man who lied about murder. He was a man who drew suspicion about every corner of his life. They showed how easily secrets could slip through the cracks when someone is skilled at compartmentalizing. And perhaps most importantly, they left behind a trail of unanswered questions. Because while the FBI moved on, the public did not. People wanted to know, why did two men, independently of one another, risk ridicule and exposure to claim a relationship with a killer? And why, if Chris Watts truly had nothing to hide, did the FBI's investigation feel like a door left half open? The official record ends in ambiguity. The discovery files document the interviews, but no resolution. No proof that Watts lived a double life. No proof that Trent Bolt lied. Just a space where truth and lies overlap, leaving everyone to wonder. For investigators, that was enough. For the public, it was fuel. Because if the FBI couldn't decide who was lying, how could anyone else? When Trent Bolt stepped in front of cameras and told the world he had been Chris Watts' secret lover, the reaction was immediate. Headlines exploded across the country. A convicted family annihilator wasn't just unfaithful to his wife. He might have been hiding his sexuality all along. Overnight, the Watts case shifted from a story of murder to a story of identity. And the public was split right down the middle. On one side were those who believed Trent. They pointed to the details he shared, the emotion in his voice, and the consistency of his story. They argued that no one would risk public humiliation, especially in a case this notorious, unless they were telling the truth. To them, Trent was a victim in his own way, a young man who had been deceived by Chris Watts, just as Shannon had been, just as the public had been. If Watts could lie to his pregnant wife, to his co-workers, to his neighbors on live television, then why wouldn't he lie about this? But on the other side, skeptics sharpened their knives. They accused Trent of chasing fame, of inserting himself into a high-profile tragedy for attention. Social media was merciless. Comment sections filled with insults, accusations, and ridicule. Clout chaser, opportunist, liar. Some pointed out that he offered no hard proof, no texts, no photos, no receipts. To them, his entire story was smoke without fire. They believed Watts' denial, not because Chris was trustworthy, but because Trent wasn't. The media fed the divide. Tabloids ran sensational headlines. Chris Watts' secret gay lover speaks out. Talk shows debated the possibility of Watts living a double life. Even serious outlets couldn't resist the story. It was too explosive, too unique. But while reporters repeated Trent's claims, few dug deeper into the evidence. The narrative became less about proof and more about spectacle. And then there was Watts himself. His silence, or rather, his repeated denials, only fueled the controversy. Each time he dismissed Trent's claims, skeptics felt vindicated. But believers argued that Watts' word meant nothing. He lied about everything else, they said. Why wouldn't he lie about this? It was a tug of war over credibility, with both men's reputations on the line. A killer's denial on one side, and an alleged lover's vulnerable confession on the other. Psychologists watching from the outside noted how perfectly the controversy mirrored the Watts case itself. Deception, identity, performance. To some, Trent's story fit the psychological profile of a man like Chris, someone who compartmentalized every part of his life, who wore masks to survive. To others, it was yet another distraction from the real horror, a man who killed his wife and children to start over with another woman. In that reading, Trent's claims weren't just false, they were irrelevant. But the public couldn't let it go. The question became a cultural debate. Was Chris Watts simply a monster hiding in plain sight? Or was he also a man whose hidden identity played a role in his destruction? And more importantly, was Trent Bolt the truth teller or the liar? The firestorm revealed something deeper. People weren't just debating the facts, they were debating what it meant. Believing Trent meant accepting that Watts' darkness ran even deeper than imagined, that he wasn't just hiding an affair, but hiding himself. Dismissing Trent meant reinforcing the story already written, that Watts killed for a new life with a woman, not to cover up a secret life with men. Each side wasn't just arguing about evidence. They were arguing about which version of Watts they were willing to believe. And so the media cycle turned, each headline pulling the story further from the courtroom and deeper into speculation. Trent gave interviews. Watts doubled down on his denials. The public devoured every word, every soundbite, every rumor. But in the end, nothing new was proven. The truth remained buried under opinion, leaving one haunting fact behind. In a case built on lies, the world still couldn't agree on who was lying now. To understand why Trent Bolt's claim struck such a nerve, you have to step outside the Watts case and look at the psychology of double lives. History is filled with men who wore masks, husbands and fathers who lived one story in the daylight and another in the shadows. For some, the secret was an affair. For others, it was an addiction. And for some, it was a hidden identity they never felt safe to admit. For Chris Watts, the question has always been, which mask was he really wearing? Psychologists describe men like Watts as compartmentalizers. They build boxes in their minds, locking away truths they can't face. In one box, the smiling husband. In another, the father playing with his children. In another, the secret self, desires, temptations, or identities they believe can never be shown. Most people can't sustain this forever. The walls crack, the masks slip, and when they do, the fallout is often catastrophic. In Watts' case, we already know he lived one double life. The life of a family man and the life of a man pursuing another woman. Nicole Kessinger was proof of that. But Trent's story suggested a deeper fracture, a man hiding not just an affair, but an identity. To live in a culture where expectations of masculinity, marriage, and fatherhood press down like stone, secrecy becomes survival. But secrecy can also become poison, because each lie demands another. Each hidden truth multiplies the pressure, and eventually, the weight becomes unbearable. Research shows that men who repress sexuality or who live closeted lives often carry extraordinary levels of stress. They fear rejection, exposure, and shame. They become experts at hiding. They learn to smile when they want to scream. They learn to lie when the truth could cost them everything. And over time, this constant performance erodes the boundary between what is real and what is staged. The result is often self-destruction. Sometimes it's depression, sometimes addiction. In rare, tragic cases, violence. So where does Chris Watts fit into this picture? If Trent's claims were true, then Watts was not only living a double life, but a triple one. Husband, boyfriend to Nicole, secret lover to Trent. That is a web of lies few men could sustain without breaking. And if Trent's claims were false, the psychology still fits. Watts was a man who built his world on deception, who spun lies until he strangled himself in them. Whether he hid his sexuality or not, he was still a man collapsing under the weight of identities he couldn't reconcile. Experts argue that this is why Trent's story resonated so deeply, even without hard proof, because it felt plausible. It fit the profile of a man like Watts, and it forced the public to confront a darker possibility, that the murders weren't only about a new life with another woman, but about burying a self he couldn't bear to reveal. Whether true or not, The psychology of double lives made Trent's claims impossible to dismiss. And this is where the case takes on a meaning far beyond Chris Watts. Because it isn't just about him. It's about every person who hides, every person forced to live in silence, every person whose identity feels like a secret that could destroy their world. In Watts' story, we see the most extreme consequences of a life built on deception. A family destroyed, a truth buried, and a question left to haunt everyone who studies the case. What happens when the lies we tell about ourselves become too heavy to carry? By now, one thing is clear. The story of Chris Watts is not just about murder. It's about identity, deception, and the secrets that may never see the light of day. Trent Bolt insists he shared a year-long romance with a man who confided in him, cried with him, and dreamed of escaping his suburban life. Chris Watts insists it never happened, that Nicole Kessinger was his only affair, and that the rest is fabrication. The FBI dug for answers, but what they found was a void, a gap where evidence should be, a silence that can never confirm nor deny. So who was lying? Was it Chris Watts, a man who lied about everything else, who spun falsehoods until the walls closed in on him, now clinging to denial as the last mask he could wear? Or was it Trent Bolt, a man with everything to gain by attaching himself to a headline, offering details that sounded true, but that no one could ever fully prove? The truth lives somewhere in the shadows. Watts' word is tainted by the blood of his family, making it nearly impossible to believe him. Bolt's word is tainted by doubt, by skepticism, by the absence of proof. And so we are left with a paradox. The liar and the alleged lover, staring at each other from opposite sides of a story no one can finish. This is the riddle that lingers. Because if Watts was lying, then Trent's story is a chilling glimpse into the pressure of a man hiding not just a mistress, but his true self. And if Trent was lying, then the tragedy of the Watts case was exploited by someone hungry for fame, adding confusion to a story already drowning in pain. Either way, the damage is done. The question may never be answered. And maybe that's the point. Because in the end, what unsettles us most is not whether Chris Watts killed his family. We already know he did. What unsettles us most is the possibility that we still don't know who he really was. The father, the husband, the murderer, the liar, or the man living a life he was too afraid to show. Chris Watts sits behind prison walls, serving out the rest of his days in silence. To the world, his name is etched in history as the man who murdered his family in cold blood. That part will never change. But the story we've explored tonight adds another layer. One that will never appear in official court records. One that even the FBI could not resolve. Was Watts hiding a secret life with men? Or was that story built by someone who saw opportunity in tragedy? What we know for certain is this. Chris Watts is a proven liar. He lied to Shannon. He lied to his daughters. He lied to his co-workers, his friends, his own father, and to the cameras staring back at him as he begged for their return. Every part of his life was built on deception. So when he denied the claims of a secret affair, how could anyone truly believe him? And yet, the man who accused him, Trent Bolt, carried his own burden. Without evidence, without receipts, his story remains a testimony without a backbone. Some believe him, some despise him, and some wonder if he became just another character in a tragedy already heavy with lies. That is the chilling truth of this case. Not that Chris Watts killed his family, but that we may never fully know who he was. Was he only the monster who wanted to start over with another woman? Or was he also a man suffocating beneath layers of secrecy, desperate to erase not just his family, but the truth about himself? The answer died the moment Watts chose murder over honesty. And so we are left with shadows, whispers, and questions that will outlive every headline. In the end, This case is no longer about guilt. It is about identity. And in a world where lies and secrets can become as deadly as any weapon, perhaps the most terrifying question is not what Chris Watts did, but what he was still trying to hide. So I leave you with this. In a case already drenched in deception, who do you believe? The convicted killer or the man who says he loved him? Tell us in the comments. And if this story unsettled you, if it made you think about the lies people hide behind closed doors, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the darkest truths aren't the ones proven in court. They're the ones we'll never be able to prove at all.